Forecasters last week predicted that Imelda would make a landfall here in South Carolina, but ultimately, Imelda went out to sea. Today, I talk one-on-one with Charleston Weber's Jared Smith for a look back for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Charleston Weber's Jared Smith, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin. Good to be here.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, last week we met here on Quintin's Close-Ups to discuss the possible tropical storm, Imelda, and of course Humberto. But obviously, there's, with all that has happened over the past couple of days, there was some good news for us here in the Low Country.
Yes, absolutely. Scenario that, the best case scenario really panned out for us. I mean, we still had a tiny bit of rain. Honestly, if anything, we could have used more rain. We've got places that are starting to get abnormally dry again, that are getting into, starting to get into the drought column once again in the drought monitor. So actually a little bit of rain would not have been the end of the world, and a lot of places didn't really see much there. But, we were spared the worst of it. Obviously, dealing with the surf, dealing with, some gusty winds. There's still a little bit of that, some of the gradient winds that we've been dealing with high pressure pushing in. But overall, yeah, it could have been a lot worse. That is for sure.
And I know, obviously, the forecasters, including yourself, found these particular two storms to be very difficult to forecast. When you look back to 2 weeks ago to right now, what is the biggest difference?
Well, I think the thing that happened was that Humberto got stronger. It became a Cat 5. And one of the solutions, and I think we talked about this, that there was an out-to-sea solution with Imelda. And as it turned out, it worked out because that solution necessarily required Humberto to get a lot stronger. And it did. It became a Cat 5. And what that did allowed a couple things. One, it kind of sheared off Imelda a little bit, kind of kept it at bay. It missed its turn. It missed the turn into the coast, which was part of it. It kept drifting and interacting with land, and so it was moving slower and missed the turn, which was great in that scenario for us. Not great. The Bahamas, they had a decent storm down there, but what Humberto did was carve an escape route for Imelda. And Imelda took it because part of that was, some of that interaction between the two systems. Humberto essentially, there was a meme that was going around with like one tropical storm with grabbing the hand of another tropical storm and pulling it along, and one of them was Humberto and one of them was Imelda. So not terribly far off from the truth there. So that's what happened. Is that Humberto was a little bit stronger. And the Hurricane Hunter data helped us understand that the blocking high to the north was going to keep it a little bit slower, and it helped us understand that the environment around Imelda was going to be conducive for a relatively slow motion, and then eventually get moving again. So and then making that sharp turn, and as we got more model data in and everything there. We still had the sharp turn in there, but for a couple more days, we were thinking, okay, well, this could still bring some decent impacts to the area. But as it turned out, the center, it turned off the coast of Florida as opposed to the coast of South Carolina, as opposed to off the Charleston coast. And so, that, again, so it worked out. Yeah, the weekend was not beautiful by any stretch of the imagination, but it worked out, and we were able to not have to put all of those plans in place. Good dry run.
Right.
So nothing wrong with that.
Right.
We have 2 months of season left too.
Yeah.
So that is something that we've got to think about.
Oh, most definitely. And you talk about those data models. Which one was the most accurate?
So as it turned out, and this has been a theme this year, Google has entered the space with its machine learning DeepMind model. And DeepMind, while DeepMind did have the landfall scenario, it was actually pretty 50-50 split between the landfall scenario and the out to sea scenario. And so the machine learning model, which the beautiful thing about the machine learning models is that you don't need as much hardware to run them. They can run on a lot less hardware. We have to run the physics-based models that we're used to. Your Euro, GFS, all of those guys. They calculate physics, and you need supercomputers to do that. With the AI models, you don't need as much compute power, and they can update a lot more frequently too. With the machine learning techniques that they use, they have their own downsides. If it's the physics models are good for sussing out things that are less likely to happen, or less haven't happened before. Put it that way. I think less likely to happen probably isn't quite what I was looking for there, but stuff that hasn't happened quite before because the models are the AI models are trained on the output of those physics-based models. So it is important. Both serve a purpose.
Right.
Both are important. And DeepMind for this season, not just with this storm, but for this season, has shown a little bit more skill with track. And if you go back and read some of the Hurricane Center discussions, you'll see that they quote, that they cite the DeepMind ensemble set pretty heavily. So that has been a fascinating emergence this season. That's a tool that we haven't had in the toolbox before, and it's certainly getting some, starting to get a little bit of clout. We're still figuring out how AI and machine learning fit into this whole, fit into the whole weather model umbrella and everything like that. But it's certainly the early returns have been fairly positive. So, and it's worth noting too that the ECMWF, the Euro guys, and
Yes.
our own GFS was
Right.
also advertising this out to sea solution, and was doing it to the point where they look like outliers at one point. But in fact, they may have had a better sense of what was going on. So it's been very interesting seeing how all this comes together. And it's if we can continue to make these machine learning models better while working on the physics-based models too. I don't think they're necessarily a replacement. You need the physics ones, and the physics ones came around, by the way. After we started putting a lot of upper air data in there and everything. We had a bunch of extra weather balloons, and we had the hurricane hunters flying nonstop missions to put drop zones in around the storm, so we understood what the atmosphere was doing, and the physics-based models, they picked it up, but DeepMind was ahead of them by about a day and a half.
Wow. What exactly was the atmosphere doing when it came to these two storms?
Yeah, so it was it was kind of fascinating because Humberto obviously was in open water, very little to inhibit it really from strengthening into a Cat 5. And honestly, hindsight being 2020,
yes,
you probably could have foreseen Humberto outpacing what the intensity models were thinking. Intensity is still very hard to forecast.
Yes.
We still have a hard time with that. We have a hard time with Imelda. We thought we would have Imelda by Saturday morning at the latest. We did not end up getting Imelda until like Sunday morning, early afternoon.
Right.
Just because it was drifting. Interacting with the islands. A lot of land interaction there was, disrupting its ability to get organized, as well as some of the shear from the trough that was digging in that was going to maybe help turn it, but no. And then Humberto getting closer and stronger. And that also in turn tends to disrupt storms around it. The hurricanes like an environment that is relatively unperturbed. They like high pressure aloft to help them kind of vent out. They like that's why a lot of times when you look at a really good looking hurricane on satellite, and Humberto definitely had this had the look for a while, kind of like that Hurricane Center. I call it the Hurricane Center business card look. Like it's one of those like textbook storms, and you watch one of those on the satellite picture, you'll know the low level circulation will be counterclockwise as low pressures in the northern hemisphere do, but you would also notice a subtle clockwise rotation of the outflow clouds, and that's the ventilation for a hurricane. So a hurricane does not like a lot of wind shear. A hurricane does not like a lot of stuff going on. It wants just give it water and space to work. And so when you get two of them close to each other, they start disrupting each other. And that's actually what happened. Imelda actually lasted longer as a hurricane than Humberto did. Imelda's shear worked on Humberto and sheared Humberto apart. while Imelda hung on, got to got to Bermuda, and is now a post-tropical cyclone departing Bermuda, interacting with a front. So it's just funny how these things work out. Uh, but yeah, that was basically the idea, and we it was it was you look at some hindsight, you look at some things. I was like, okay, maybe we could have done a couple of these things a little bit better, um, but yeah, we take a look at it, and yeah, it was just really fascinating to watch the interaction there. It's not something we see a lot in the Atlantic.
That's true. And you talk about the Atlantic and you talk about the water. What exactly was the water temperature when Herberto and Imelda actually converged, for lack of a better word?
Well, I have to go back and look, but I know that they were moving into somewhat colder water at that point too. So I
Ah,
mean, you're getting further north into the Atlantic. Really this time of year, especially the steam bath. Your 80+ degree
right.
water temperature is going to be found. Gulf Stream and points east, and so it was around there. I would have to double check on the actual numbers, uh, but it was enough to sustain and strengthen a tropical cyclone. I mean, Imelda took advantage of the Gulf Stream, became a Cat 2 before it made it to Bermuda. It started kind of unwinding a little bit, started losing that tropical look, and transitioning more into an extratropical cyclone, which is a little bit more. That's where you have fronts attached and everything like that. It's a vast majority of low pressures that we deal with here, especially in the winter.
And in the winter, yeah, absolutely. And I have to go back early to what you talked about as far as Imelda bringing us a little bit of rain. How much rain did we get as far as inches?
I mean, it wasn't even an inch. In many places, when looking at that, we were lucky to get, a couple tenths of an inch. We really didn't get that much. There was still thinking at one point that maybe a flood watch was going to be needed that Monday and that Monday and that Tuesday, and it was just never needed.
Right.
Just because the center made that turn, sooner. There just was not as much moisture flowing in over the top of the stalled cold front that was on the coast, with the trough digging in. A lot of that water, a lot of that rain fell offshore. Now, there were some spots, maybe in the PD, that got a little bit more rain.
Hmm.
But here in the Tri County, aside from maybe McClellanville and Jamestown,
Right.
really not a lot of rain to speak of at all. Honestly, somewhat disappointing for folks who were, hoping to get, a good soaking for, I mean, gardens go a long time here, and so they were, people are still hoping for that, and didn't quite get it. So we'll have more chances,
Yes.
coming up, over the weekend, especially later this weekend, with another system kind of front, kind of developing along the coast, installing out and doing its thing. But um, it's been hard up for rain. It's been very difficult to get rain. And it's very
Wow.
hard to break a drought. And even with a tropical cyclone that decides and takes a look, it's like, yeah, no thanks, and turns away.
What is the difficulty in getting rain to our region right now?
Well, a lot of it is just as there's dry air begets dry air, right? You have dry soils, and so sometimes that can make it tougher for the atmosphere to sustain precipitation to the ground. That can happen, but really, a lot of what we've been seeing is just a lot of cooler and drier air. In fact, you're sitting outside, at this taping. It's 76 degrees at the airport
Yes.
as we're speaking right now. It's the dew point was in the upper 50s to low 60s. That's pretty. That's fairly dry, cooler air for this area, and so we've just not had a lot of. We've had some of the upper level stuff, but the moisture, it just doesn't seem to just really be there for us. Again, we were talking about the other thing that we were talking about is like, oh my goodness, we're going to see a ton of rain, Saturday into Sunday ahead of Imelda because we were worried about some heavy rain there, and that didn't materialize either. Um, so it's just we just haven't been in a setup where the forcing has been there. Like just these things have not come together, and in some of these cases that's good because that would mean that we would bring out 2 to 3 inches of rain in a very short period of time. Don't want that either.
Right.
Um, so we haven't quite had just haven't really quite had those setups in the last month. September was a very dry month,
Hmm.
and October starting that way too.
Yeah, obviously you talk about the rain coming this weekend, and you talk about how the dew point right now is very ideal, and it's like 76 degrees up there at the airport. So let me ask you this, Dan: how is October for the next 2 weeks going to look?
Yeah, so what we're looking at heading into the weekend is like right now we're kind of we have a high pressure to the northeast. It's anchored in the northeast, something called a wedge, and basically that wedge of high pressure is cooler air that sinks down along the side of the Appalachians and just kind of like spills in, uh, and that's what we've been in. That's really that was a pattern that we saw a lot of in September, and that helped keep us dry. Sometimes you can get moist. Sometimes further up you can get moisture aloft that can overrun that, and then at that point you can start to get some rain showers and things like that. And you can have a trough set up just along the coast in that kind of scenario where you have warmer air separated by warmer air over the ocean at that point, and then that cooler, drier air over land, and so it sets up kind of a coastal front in that case, and that's a way that we can get some showers and storms. Off of that, and eventually, as that high pressure lifts out, that warm front lifts inland, and so that can increase your shower and storm risk. But we haven't. But with that in mind, we've been running pretty much on the cooler side of normal for the better part of the next week or so. And as we take a peek into next week, still some showers around, still some unsettled conditions. As I think there is a trough over the east, and that's going to keep things somewhat unsettled. But really, it's nothing too out of bounds. And the nice thing is I haven't written I mean, I know you like the heat. I haven't been able to write 90 in a forecast, for the last few days, and that's a nice thing,
Yes.
truth be told. For most folks at this point of the year are ready for, they're ready for maybe not sweaters, but certainly something a little bit, more seasonable. And that's what we're going to get, upper 70s, low 80s, and just with some shower chances with, continued onshore flow.
And in my second favorite city, Cincinnati, they're having a tremendous warm trend there, and I think it's going to
Mm-hmm.
continue for the next 2 weeks there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just funny how it works out because they're on the other they're on the other side of the wedge, and so we're that cold air literally gets stuck, and that cooler and drier air, because cooler air sinks, and so it sinks in and oozes down, and that keeps us in the that keeps us a little bit more on the cool side, especially with the northeasterly breeze that'll come in. One thing also for everybody to know is that we're going to be getting into another round of king tides here,
Oh yes.
and coastal flooding is going to be an issue over the next several days, starting in the evenings. But next week, as the full moon pops out, I think it's on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday. We're going to start to see even higher water levels, and we've had that easterly to northeasterly flow, and that can help kick those water levels up into and well into flood stage. So I want folks to just be aware that this is something that happens this time of year because of the way that the weather pattern sets up, and just the time of year and where we are in the Earth's orbit, in the sun's orbit, honestly has a lot to do with that, and how the moon orbits us, and just
Right.
a lot of astronomical factors that go in. So we are in coastal flood season. Be ready to get around and to find new routes, especially if you're downtown around high tides. Over the next couple weeks. In fact, as of this taping right now, there actually is a coastal flood advisory until 7 for some minor flooding. So nothing we can't handle. We're used to it by now, but something to always keep in mind that you want to avoid flooded roads, because especially with tidal flooding, because that is salt water,
Yes.
and that is. Salt water will go nom 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 on your car's undercarriage, and that is a very expensive repair. So, want folks to be aware of that, be careful of that, and again, driving through floodwaters never recommended. It's just not a good idea.
No, not at all. And I saw some people trying to go through the barricades down there by the Citadel, the Johnson Hager Stadium last night.
You can't do that. Yeah, you never go around a barricade. That barricade is up for a very good reason, and uh, with tidal flooding setups, usually it's not really as big of a deal. But when you get like these heavy flash flood situations like we've had, like in August, for example, you can run into situations where that road is closed because that road no longer exists. And we see that a lot further inland, into your Berkeley and your Dorchester counties, where you have a little bit more away from the coast, and it's a little bit more rural there. You can see, you see that happen, and so yeah, that's not a chance you want to take.
No, not at all, not at all. And hopefully, our people, our friends on Polly's Island, will pay attention as well, because that's going to be a problem there as well.
Yep, absolutely. Polly's is very vulnerable to that sort of thing, and I think it's worth noting too that not Charleston related, but if you look up in the Outer Banks, there have been 7 or 8 houses that have collapsed into the Atlantic over the last few days, partially because of the swell from both Imelda and Humberto and the coastal flooding that is causing up there. So. So while we did not get direct impacts from these storms, still very impactful, even on the periphery. So something that we always have to keep in mind is that the atmosphere is a fluid, and it's a fluid that honestly affects all of us. So we need folks to sometimes these things can turn. Even though it'll turn, even though it turned, there's still times where it can still cause problems.
Yes, absolutely. But I just thank God in heaven and Jesus Christ that they spared us from this particular storm, because it could have been more devastating.
Yeah, and again, some of the modeling that we were looking at with that direct landfall scenario was, looking at a really good bit of rain, and the potential for that stall and turn to happen over land, and that would not have been great. And so yes, very pleased to see the out to sea there, and sparing a lot of folks who have had flood issues. Um, and also at the time, we are now at the 10-year anniversary of the 2015 flood,
Right.
and those are memories that I don't think that we're ready to relive again for a long time.
Right about that. God bless those people in the Midlands as well.
Yes.
Well, Jared Smith with Charleston Weather, thank you for your time again. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin. Always good to talk about a hurricane that didn't happen.
Right. Yes, and let's pray to God that the hurricanes will stay away.
Knock on wood, prayers, whatever you do, whatever it is, special dances. Let's just keep the good times rolling.
Yes.
But let's also be ready, because we do have 2 months left, and we can get impacts in October. So we've had that happen before, with Ian, just a couple of years ago. So folks, again, we're almost there. We're getting close. We're getting there. Just hang in a little bit longer.
Oh, yes, and thank you for all your help.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Oh, you're welcome.